This here is a 2011 Chevrolet truck. We're just going to do a quickie on brakes. It's a Silverado. This works from 05 up to 013. If you're doing this in the yard and you're going to attempt this on your own, I suggest that you have some blocks of wood like this right here, because cinder blocks and other things don't really stand up that well in dirt. The cinder blocks can crush or crumble on you. So blocks of wood like this are very handy, or a big old tire rim stacked up. Something that's not going to crumble like a cinder block will. Then you'll place the jack up underneath the control arm. If you look up underneath the vehicle, this 2011 Chevrolet or 2005 all the way up to 1350, even all the way up, but about all these models like this are like this. Just jack it up by that control arm right there, which is out here at the wheel. Got the tire already off. A few things to know about is these plastic caps, you don't tighten them up or loosen them with a power tool. You use something hand operated. You'll break these plastic clips. And once you've got it jacked up, of course, you'd want to use a jack stand. And if you're doing this at home on the ground, make sure the tire's on the ground first, because your breaker bar is going to turn the wheel. So make sure you get all your lug nuts broke loose before you jack it up. Key number one, break all the lug nuts loose first. Okay, so next up will be, we'll get the brake caliper off. So we'll remove these two bolts right here. And I'm going to pause it and see what happens. Okay, so I've got the brake caliper off. So an often overlooked thing on brakes that causes an issue where the brake pads wear unevenly, like if you see the brake pads wearing where they have a, if you out of here, you look at your brake pads and you see the surface starting to wear uneven, which these are doing very well. Typically you've got a stuck pin. These things will get jammed up and causing a, oh, there's one jammed up right there. See, I can't move that one. I can move this one up here. This one right here, it's stuck. It's not stuck bad. It's going to come out, but that right there is what causes some weird brake issues. It must have started sticking there at the end. So we'll get that out and we'll clean those up. You use a special brake lubricant. This one's about empty, but you use a special brake parts lubricant. You don't use wheel bearing grease on these parts. Right here, you'll ruin the rubber. The rubber will not, it's not compatible with petroleum-based grease. So we'll remember that. So when you're using lubricant on the brakes, you use brake lubricant. Alright, so let me get this all off, and I'll be right back. Another quick thing before I pause the video again is the bolts that you take off are the bolts back here that mount the bracket on. See, the bracket's right here, and it bolts onto one of the bolt right there. And bolt right there. They're 18 millimeter, by the way. 18 millimeter. That takes those bolts off, and then you can get this bracket off. Okay, so I've got the pin out, and I took and cleaned it off with just some emery cloth or a sandpaper or anything, or I got a wire wheel, but if you're doing this in the yard, some emery cloth, sandpaper, or a wire brush will clean that off. That right there, it's going to have some goo in there. You want to get that out. So there's some stuff that I use called brake cleaner. It's just some stuff like that, or gasoline will work if you're not scared, so hold on. Okay, so got it all loose, so we're going to work it in there and make sure it's loose. We can see that moves nice and freely. We'll clean the other one up and we'll do the same thing. Alright, so the next feat that you're going to tackle for this right here, if you're going to replace the brake rotors, which is suggested if you want to have a complete brake job where you don't have any issues of brake pads squealing or giving trouble down the road, you replace the rotors. This one bolt right here, or this Torx, this Torx screw right here can be very difficult to get out because of its seizure in there where it's at. And I've come up with I devised a method that works, man, and it works really good. You just take a punch and you'll put it right there on the outside of it, and you'll take a decent size, you know, it doesn't take much, but I use this hammer because it's like my big old hammer sometimes. And you're going to go around the outside edge just a little bit. You're going to hit it kind of hard, actually. Tink, tink, tink. And you know, if you knurl this in just a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. You can tap your socket back in there, but you may have to hit this kind of hard with your punch and hammer. But when you do, it'll just spin right out. You won't have any trouble at all. Okay, we're going to do that. But I can't film it because I need both hands. It looks something like, well, you can't see. Okay, hold on. Okay, so I've tapped around that, so it's real minimal force. It's funny, it'll just jar that thing loose. If you kind of tap in that direction just a little bit when you're hitting it, it'll just thread right out of there. No problem at all. So you don't break any of these bits, you don't have a hard time, and you're not fussing at it because it won't come out. That's the thing. This punch and a hammer, you hit that and draw that right there, that's the trick to getting that off. Alright, so we're going back with the new rotors. We'll put our Torx bit back in here. And our socket has went missing as usual. It'll work right now. So anyhow, putting this back, I'll tighten that with a wrench. These are new rotors. Typically they'll come with a packing grease on them. So I always take brake cleaner or gas and wipe that off really good so we get the oily residue off, because we want that cutting in on the new pads. Okay, I'll be right back again. We'll be remounting our caliper bracket right here. It just bolts back on like a reverse procedure. Another fun trick that I use when I'm working with this stuff is typically these little guides right here will fall out if you take both brake pads off. So while you're working on this caliper bracket mounting bracket, you leave one brake pad on the whole time, because that way you don't have any problem with these things falling out and be coming off cattywampus and trying to get them back in. Okay, be right back again. Okay, so we got our new pads in, and like most brake pad assemblies, one pad will be a little bit different to the other, so note which pad comes out where. I would show you all that, but I got to just make sure you leave one brake pad and you can't go wrong. It's a win-win situation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be pressing the caliper back, and I got a fun method for doing this. A lot of people use a C-clamp, or like a C-clamp, but I'm going to use a big old welder's clamp because it seems to be a little quicker and a little less cumbersome. And it looks like this right here, and I'll just, and I can press both caliper pistons back with no problem. You know, this actually works really well. You'll clamp it down. I'm using one hand. And then once it squeezes back, you just let it loose, adjust up, and you'll do that 3 or 4 times, and it'll just push that thing back. One thing you want to always do is note how much fluid is in this cylinder right here, because if it's real full already when you're putting the brake pads on, you can take a grease rag or a little baby ear wax sucker and you can suck some of that out so that your fluid doesn't just go all over the place and all over your wiring. So this one was low enough because nobody's added brake fluid through its service procedure that when I press the caliper pistons back, I got one side already done. When I press the other side back, it's going to be level. But that's something to think about when you're pressing the pistons back. It can go all over the place, but it typically makes a mess, and it may get on some intricate components like your if it's a front wheel drive vehicle, your neutral safety switch or something. So you always want to make sure the fluid doesn't run out of that all over the place. Okay, so I'm going to press this piston back. I'm going to bolt the caliper back on, and I'll be right back. Okay, so caliper is bolted back onto the bracket. Those are 19mm bolts. Sometimes you have to hold these little, right here, you have to put something on that. Anything works. A little small pair of vice grips, because this doesn't take much. You just need to keep it from turning when tightening this. And I don't know if I showed you that before, but I'd hang the caliper by a piece of wire, a coat hanger, or something. You don't let the brake caliper hang by the rubber hose, because that can damage it. It's old and it's rubber, and you can create a problem by letting it just dangle, or if it falls, boom, and it pulls down on it real hard, that's not good. So you want to tie that thing off secure when you're working with it. We're going to put the wheel back on, and I'll be right back. Okay, so back again. What I'm going to be doing is using a torque wrench. A lot of people just run them down really tight with a impact gun. That's okay. The tire won't go anywhere, but new rotors, it really pays to torque the wheels evenly, because the uneven tension across the wheels or the rotor itself can cause warpage under high brake temperatures. And plus, you'll know that way if you need to get it back off on the side of the road, if you have a flat tire, you're not stuck with a 4-foot pry bar and 4 rednecks standing on it. So anyhow, we're going to torque this thing down. I've already kind of torqued it. I cheated a little bit ago, so I just, you always want to go in a crosshatch pattern though. So kind of torque. Let's go back over it again. Another wheel I got already is what it did. So anyhow, just go in a crosshatch pattern. What that means is you'll go from here to there. You go across, then you go to the next one and across from it. That's called a crosshatch. And then you'll replace your hub cap with, and I just use my hand. I just tighten these by hand with a 1/2-inch socket. I don't do no more, no less. You'll just tighten them up. You give them a good little snug, and you're good to go. And after that, you want to make sure you pump the brake pedal up before you put it in gear, because you got to bring the caliper out to the rotors, because you've pressed the pistons all the way back. You may be on a hill or something close by. So make sure you pump the brake pedal up so you got a full pedal, and then you're ready to go. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in. This is front brakes on anywhere from an 03 to a 2013 Chevrolet pickup. Front brakes. Thank you.